welcome to the next episode of Case This Window. That's horrible. First thing I need to do is figure out how high this windowsill is going to be. This is thicker than the piece of wood that I have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim a piece and I'll just show you, I guess. Let's do the show and less telling, more showing. Okay, so here is a piece of the trim. It'll go like so. So I want to do two things with this piece. One, I'll mark the back and check it again up here just to make sure that the gap is the same. Okay, so now I see that the thickness is not the same. I have this darker line is on the right side, this lighter line's on the left. And I'll just go ahead and assume that this is pretty close, which it is. It's about like an 1/8 inch off, I guess, from either side, and that's okay. I'll clean all that up once I cut those pieces. So the main thing that I wanted to do with this, though, is determine the reveal that's left on the window after I frame it out. And the reason this is important is to see how uniform it is around the window. So left to right is pretty similar. Actually, they're all the same. That's amazing. But what would not be the same is if I just put the windowsill right here. So what I need to do now is actually take the measurement from the mark, work backwards, and then make my mark here and find out how much I need to increase this. So looking at 1 inch and 7/16. And here we have 11/16. So that leaves me with like 3/4. So now I need something that's 3/4 inch thick to stick under there. Maybe I can find something in my shop. I guess scrap is scrap, right? I've been holding on to this 3/4 inch plywood for a long time and I haven't used it yet. So what's the point of holding on to it? It's better than using the oak or cherry, I guess. So we're like a 1/16 off, and I say that's close enough. All right, so I'll get the width of the window, cut a strip here, slide there in like so. So when I cut the windowsill, I need to take into account the thickness of the trim on both sides while maintaining the interior here. All right, so for the windowsill itself, I'm looking at 22 and 11/16 plus the trim that's going to be on the edge of the window, which actually, but it's going to be overhang. This is a little tricky. So, all right, I spent like the last 20 minutes trying to do the math, and then I had a light bulb moment. So here's the trim. It's going to sit up against the window here. Now I just need to do 3 1/4 off of that. Put my mark. Do the same thing to this side. Measure the distance in between. I set it back up on these marks. This is for the sill. Really just need a nice straight line here. All right. So I'm marking here for the depth and just notch out this side so that it slides in like so. I'm being very mindful here of where I'm stopping this cut. If I flipped the board over, you would see that it actually cuts into the corner on the bottom, but not the top. So I want the reveal to look super smooth and square. Also, take your time on this part. As you can see, I don't have an in-feed table, which would have been very beneficial. The Japanese pool saw is a perfect companion to complete this task. It's very precise, very sharp. Nice. And it would be plenty of room for my plant. Who needs a friend? Maybe a fern. I'm actually going to put the top one in next. All right, so I need to get the thickness, the depth, or whomever. Now I need to get the measurement from here to here. It's probably close, but you know, at least in my house, nothing is square. And then to simulate having this up top, I'm just going to keep it on the bottom, and I'll make my measurements now. All right, the last thing I want to do is nail everything together. I want to push it in and make sure that it all fits before I realize that I make a mistake and have to rip it all out. Somebody forgot to turn the camera on when I made the first 2 cuts. So I fired him, and then I was just sitting around because I got fired and nothing was getting done. So I hired myself back. It is tight, which is good. So it's in and up in the back. Let's see if this fits. Probably going to be a no. But again, I'd rather trim this a little bit. I'll go take another 16th off of this and try again. Nice. Done. Just kidding. So now, just make sure that it's all pushed in. Well, I think the best bet is to start trimming low. You know, do a shallow pass all the way around, come back, push it all back in, and then take another piece of trim and wait until it's flush. Final answer. Hey, if you're finding any value from this video, I'd really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed, even shared this if you know somebody else who's looking to do some home improvement projects. Finally to the point where it doesn't stick out past the wall. And this looks good. So good. All right, here I clearly didn't take into account that you're watching my back the whole time and you couldn't actually see what I'm doing. I am using the nailer, obviously, to nail the trim in place, but I'm also paying very close attention by having this scrap piece of trim that there's no gap at the closest part to me of the trim. Now there's a gap against the window, and that's totally fine because I'm going to caulk that later. But I did not want you to see a big gap between the trim that's facing the camera right now and the trim that's going along the inside of the window. for the nails, we want to make sure that we set them in as far as possible. So get a nail set. This is where the miter gauge shines. Take this all the way over to 45. Lock it in. Move the fence. And then I'll just sneak up on that cut. I'll do a couple of passes and sneak up on it. When I cut it at this angle, this will be the right side. And then the only way to cut the other angle is to flip it over and cut the back side. All right. So I'll do the first cut this way. Love it. All right, so now we have our two cuts, one on either side of the window. So at the top of the window, what I'm going to do is make sure that everything's all nice and straight. And then I am going to mark this very edge. All right, so let's zoom up so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. That matches, but this is a little high, which you can see right here. I didn't really pay attention to that the first time. So I'll need to trim that back just a hair. All right. There you are. All framed in. All right, so to fill all these holes, in the past I've just squirted some caulk in there, and it does okay, but if you're gonna sand it, sometimes it rips out. When it comes to filling the gap up around the top and down the side, I like to use this spackle. So this is go on pink, and then when it dries, it's nice and white, and then you can sand it, paint it. You grab a small plastic putty knife. I prefer plastic because it doesn't scratch the paint off of the MDF here. And I'm going to fill in as much as possible. Put it on top, squish it in, and eventually it will stop, come down. And I'll put a nice coat over top of it, and we will sand it down later once it's dry. So these cracks up the side here, the MDF kind of bows. So right now, all the way up here, almost this whole way, yeah. The face MDF trim is slightly proud, so I want to sit here and slap a bunch of this spackle on here, and I'm going to take it out as wide as my putty knife is. And so I'm putting a decent amount of pressure, but as you can kind of see down here, I want a little bit of the spackle on this side of the line, and then as wide as the putty knife here, go all the way up. And I want just enough pressure to scrape it off until I can see the line in between. So these corners are difficult because this top piece was about a 1/16 of an inch out. So what I did was feathered all the spackle against that edge, and then I ran my putty knife up the line and put medium pressure on there and tried to balance out as much as I could the furthest distance to take it. And then I had to feather out this part so that it wasn't super thick in this corner, and then feather out on the edge. The only way that you get good at this is to do it over and over again. So same thing over here. This one was tricky because the top half is the low part, but down here on this bottom half, that's the low part in here. So I did the same thing. I put a ton of putty on here, of spackle, and then as you can see, this top corner was really hard for me to get that point, but you won't see it up here. Once it's painted, you won't really notice that. But you take it and keep it broad, and then there's a nail hole there and a nail hole down here. So I had to blend or feather that in with the edge here. It's better to leave it a little thick, let it dry, and light sanding, very light sanding. So now we're at the step of sanding everything off. I have some 400 grit sandpaper. I'm just going to take it and smooth over the top. Nothing crazy. I'm starting with this 400 because I don't want to take off too much, and it happens quicker than you think. You could probably do 320 if you have it. That's what I probably would have preferred, but I don't have it on hand. And then grab the vacuum, suck it off. I'll go all the way around. And then once that's done, it's ready for paint. I'm going to wait until after I paint to do all the caulking. And that's really for all your joints around the window. And then honestly in here, down at the bottom. As you can see, it's been 3 weeks since I last recorded. And the spackle here cracked with the house moving and everything. And I'm okay with that. The big part of putting the spackle here was to match the edges so that this is a flat surface now, not to hide the crack. If you wanted to hide the crack, you need to caulk that with something that's not going to shrink. All right, so I'll bring it up. You can see just a little bit. Sorry, that's probably awkward to see. You can still see the seam. You can barely see the seam between this board. Like down here, you can see it. And then this edge right here is where the spackle starts. And when I put some primer on it, that line will disappear. And up here, there's the one nail hole. And then that corner, sorry, lighting is really hard to get to. Just the very top corner doesn't look that great from that angle, but from down here looking up, you can hardly see it. Same thing over here. This line is more exposed, and I'm okay with that. Like I said, I don't mind you seeing the miter of the casework. So on the inside, same thing. But that's what it looks like pre-paint. All right, so the next step is putting some tape up. All right, now that that's done, I can take this tack cloth and wipe everything down and remove all the dust before I start painting. Next up, adding some caulk. So this is paintable within 2 hours. And what I want to do is hit every corner on the inside and then the very front and underneath the sill. And then what that will do is make a blend in effect, and you won't really be able to see that that's more than one piece. All right, so I cut the tip at a 45-degree angle. I'm just going to squeeze a light bead and have that 45-degree angle in the corner as much as possible. I would go nice and slow here. It's easier to do a second and third coat than to go back and remove the extra caulk. All right, so a friend of mine sent me a video where there was a guy that doing caulking, and he sprayed the caulk with Windex, and then he came through and wiped it up. Now the Windex prevented that caulk from spreading and anywhere else, so it didn't stick to where the Windex was. I don't know about you, but I'm amazed. Here we are. Everything's dry-ish. Dry enough to paint anyway. So I'm just gonna take a brush full of paint and start slapping it on. This is primer, not so much paint. Kills 2 because it's bathroom, so I want to reduce the chance of mildew. We'll let that dry and come back tomorrow with a second coat. I am so ecstatic when it comes to how the caulk line turned out. I absolutely love it. It was so easy and it looks so good. Let me know what you think in the comments. Have you ever done this? Or are you going to try it?